I'm starting this handspun V-neck sweater with Colombia wool. I made this a couple years ago during the Tour de Felice, and I didn't really have an idea for it at the time. I just wanted to make a decent 3-ply. And so I had about 580 yards thereabouts. Didn't know what to do with it. Figured as part of the Fiber Talk series I should probably just knit something, but didn't know what, and so I decided to go ahead and see how it worked with some of my other handspun to see if I can make a larger project, and decided that the consistency of the gauge of this yarn was very similar to the weaving yarn that I made for a failed project from 2013. Yes, there's also some of my own hair in the handspun, but in total I had about 1,400 yards. I had about almost 600 yards of this red Colombia wool, and I had a little over 800 yards of the merino, which I added a little bit of sparkle fiber to. It's not in this video, but it's on my Patreon page. And I'm just demonstrating some of my knitting process here. I know everybody knits slightly differently, but knitting with handspun, there is a couple of different issues, one being the gauge. If you are a very consistent spinner like me, then gauge is much easier because the consistency is well defined throughout the entire skein of yarn. However, I know that some handspun can be quite variable. If you're not really caring too much about gauge, or if you're going for more texture, then obviously the gauge is going to be impacted by those inconsistencies, but I think it would still be viable for a project like this. You would just have to be slightly more flexible and have some skill with knitting so that you can accommodate the differences in handspun. The other thing about knitting with handspun is you have much greater control over the design of the yarn. So in this case, I am using a 3-ply Navajo ply yarn, and it's got a fairly high twist. So part of the reason why I wanted to use the red on the top was because I knew it was a sturdier fiber to begin with, and the twist is slightly higher than that which I had for the merino, which I'm using for the main body and the sleeves of the sweater. And so I figured if I use the sturdier wool for the top portion, then I wouldn't have as much issue with pilling. So that was part of my thought process in designing this. Also, with a bolder color up near my face versus lower down, it would draw the attention towards the widest part of my body, and obviously with the wider being around my midsection, it would be a little nicer in terms of the silhouette that I was making. In this project, I opted for a size 3.5 millimeter set of needles because I didn't want this to be a very dense looking sweater, or I didn't want it to have a very dense drape. So I could have gone with probably a size 2 needle, but decided that I wanted it to have more flexibility. I wanted it to have more stretchiness. That way, if I wanted to wear something long sleeve underneath it, I could, but also equally I could use a tank top underneath it as well. So it's going to be a much nicer drape by using slightly larger needles. But this is also one of the things about making your own that's really quite nice, because you can make all these decisions yourself, and if you don't like it, you can always go back and reknit it.